How dare you sneak in here? My mother's hand connected with my cheek so hard, my ears rang right in the middle of my father's black tie birthday gala. While I stood there in shock, my father grabbed my arm and whispered for me to leave through the kitchen. He said I was an embarrassment. He had no idea that just an hour later, the governor of Georgia would stand up in that very room and ask them if they knew who I really was. My name is Zuri. I am 32 years old, and this is the story of how I dismantled my toxic family's empire in a single night. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind your family exactly who they are dealing with. I am sitting in my Atlanta penthouse right now, pouring a glass of aged bourbon, wearing the same emerald silk dress I wore that night. The heavy fabric still feels like a suit of armor against my skin. For my entire life, I was the designated scapegoat of my family. I was the daughter who never quite fit into their perfectly curated cutthroat image of high society success. They pushed me out into the cold years ago, fully expecting me to fail and crawl back begging for scraps. Instead, I became a venture capitalist and an asset liquidator. I specialize in building empires out of the wreckage that arrogant people leave behind. But my parents did not know any of that. To them, I was still the ultimate disappointment they had gladly discarded. It happened on a chilly Saturday evening in November. The air outside in Atlanta was crisp, but inside the Piedmont Elite Club, it was suffocatingly warm and dripping with generational wealth. My father, Harrison, was celebrating his 60th birthday. This was not just a family gathering. It was a $100,000 spectacle meticulously designed to flaunt his real estate dominance to the most powerful people in the state. The grand ballroom was a sea of custom tuxedos, designer gowns, and blinding diamond jewelry. Live jazz drifted softly through the vaulted ceilings, mixing seamlessly with the clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the low, hungry hum of strategic networking. I walked through the towering double mahogany doors with my head held high and my shoulders back. I did not sneak in. I did not use a side door. I walked right through the main entrance like I owned the place because, in a very real legal sense, I was about to. I barely had time to take in the massive ice sculptures and the towering floral arrangements before a sharp, dramatic gasp cut through the music near the entrance. It was my mother, Beatrice. She was wearing a custom silver gown that caught every beam of light in the room, her hair sculpted into absolute perfection. But her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She marched toward me, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the polished marble floor. She did not greet me. She did not ask how I had been doing these past 5 years. Without a single word of warning, she raised her hand and struck me across the face. The slap echoed sharply over the jazz band. The stinging, violent sound made dozens of heads turn in our direction. My cheek burned instantly, a sudden fierce heat spreading up to my eye. I tasted a faint hint of copper where my teeth had caught the soft inside of my lip. I stood perfectly still, refusing to bring my hand up to rub the pain away. Beatrice stepped closer, her eyes wild with the obsession for social status that had always mattered more to her than her own flesh and blood. "How dare you sneak in here?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper perfectly pitched to humiliate me without causing a total scene. "Whose invitation did you steal to get past the front desk? Look at you. Your trashy presence is going to ruin your father's $100,000 gala. We have major investors here tonight. We have politicians here. And you show up looking like a street rat ready to beg for a handout." I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling absolutely nothing but pity for her shallow existence. "I am not here to beg, Mother," I said calmly. But she was not listening. She never listened to me. "You have always been a curse on this family's legacy." Beatrice continued, pointing a manicured, trembling finger directly at my chest. "We worked too hard to build our name in this city. We climbed to the top so we would not have to deal with failures like you. Look at your sister Jasmine. She is bringing a wealthy, brilliant investor into this family tonight. She is elevating us. And then there is you. I told you years ago that you were no longer welcome in our circle. You bring your ghetto drama everywhere you go, and I will not let you destroy the most important night of your father's life. Security should have thrown you out onto the pavement the second you stepped off the curb." Before I could even open my mouth to respond to her vitriol, a heavy, unforgiving hand clamped down hard on my bicep. The grip was punishing, meant to control and intimidate. It was my father, Harrison. He pulled me roughly to the side, trying to shield the commotion from the VIP tables situated near the main stage. I looked up at him, hoping for just a fraction of a second that a father might intervene and defend his daughter from a public assault. I should have known better. Harrison's face was carved from stone, his eyes cold and entirely devoid of any paternal warmth. "Keep your voice down and stop making a scene," Harrison growled, his fingers digging painfully deep into my arm. "Do you have any idea what is at stake tonight? The governor is arriving in less than 20 minutes. Trent is bringing his biggest financial backers from New York. We are about to secure the most lucrative real estate deal in the history of the South Side. I am cleansing that neighborhood of its trash, and I will not have my uneducated failure of a daughter standing in the lobby reminding everyone of the one mistake I could not pave over." He released my arm with a violent, dismissive shove, pointing toward a set of swinging wooden doors meant only for the waitstaff. "Go through those doors," he ordered, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. "Walk through the kitchen, out the service exit, and go back to whatever pathetic, miserable life you are living. Do not speak to a single guest. Do not look at the event cameras. Just disappear. If I see your face in this ballroom again, I will personally have the police arrest you for trespassing. You are a complete embarrassment to the name Harrison. Now get out of my sight before I ruin you myself." I stand here in my penthouse now, looking out over the glittering city skyline, and I just smile. I remember looking at my father's furious red face. I remember watching my mother adjust her diamond necklace as if she had just swatted away an annoying fly. They looked at me with such absolute unfiltered disdain. They truly believed I was a helpless victim. They thought I was a scapegoat. They could just kick out the back door whenever my existence inconvenienced their ruthless climb to the top of the social ladder. They thought they held all the money, all the influence, and all the power. They thought I was just a dirty stain on their pristine, wealthy image. But what Harrison and Beatrice failed to realize is that I did not come to their luxurious party to eat their catered food or take family pictures. I came to collect a massive debt. They always thought I was a stain, but they had absolutely no idea that the shadow of that stain was about to swallow them whole. "How dare you sneak in here?" The slap cracked across my face so hard it silenced a 10-piece jazz band. My mother stood there in her custom designer gown, diamonds shaking at her throat, while my father gripped my bruised arm and hissed for me to leave through the kitchen. They thought I was just the family disappointment crashing their $100,000 gala. They had absolutely no idea that before the night was over, the governor of Georgia himself would be standing at their podium, stripping away their entire real estate empire and handing the keys directly to me. My name is Zuri, and this is exactly how you burn a toxic family dynasty to the ground. Let me know where you are listening from in the comments, and hit subscribe if you have ever had to teach your family a lesson they will never forget. I am sitting in my Atlanta penthouse right now, pouring a glass of aged bourbon, wearing the exact same emerald silk dress I wore that night. The heavy fabric still feels like a suit of armor against my skin. For my entire life, I was the designated scapegoat of my family. I was the daughter who never quite fit into their perfectly curated cutthroat image of high society success. They pushed me out into the cold years ago, fully expecting me to fail and crawl back begging for scraps. Instead, I became a venture capitalist and an asset liquidator. I specialize in building empires out of the wreckage that arrogant people leave behind. But my parents did not know any of that. To them, I was still the ultimate disappointment they had gladly discarded. It happened on a chilly Saturday evening in November. The air outside in Atlanta was crisp, but inside the Piedmont Heritage Club, it was suffocatingly warm and dripping with generational wealth. My father Harrison was celebrating his 60th birthday. This was not just a family gathering. It was a $100,000 spectacle meticulously designed to flaunt his real estate dominance to the most powerful people in the state. The grand foyer was a sea of custom tuxedos, expensive silk gowns, and blinding diamond jewelry. The room was packed with the city elite politicians, major developers, and legacy families networking over premium cocktails. Live jazz drifted softly through the vaulted ceilings, mixing seamlessly with the clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the low, hungry hum of strategic ambition. I walked through the towering double mahogany doors with my head held high and my shoulders back. I did not sneak in. I did not use a side door. I walked right through the main entrance like I owned the place because in a very real legal sense I was about to. I barely had time to hand my coat to the attendant when I heard the frantic clicking of heels hitting the marble floor. I turned just in time to see my mother Beatrice charging toward me like a heat-seeking missile. There was no greeting. There was no hesitation. She raised her hand and struck me across the face with everything she had. The sharp smack echoed through the high ceilings. The lively jazz music seemed to falter for a split second as dozens of heads turned in our direction. My cheek burned instantly, a sudden fierce heat spreading up to my eye. I tasted a faint hint of copper where my teeth had caught the soft inside of my lip. I stood perfectly still, refusing to bring my hand up to rub the pain away. I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. Beatrice stepped closer, her eyes wild with the obsessive need to protect her social standing. She had always cared more about what her wealthy friends thought than she ever cared about her own flesh and blood. "Whose invitation did you steal to get past the front desk?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper, perfectly pitched to humiliate me without causing a total scene. "Look at you. Did you really think you could just waltz in here and ruin your father's gala with your pathetic, ragged presence? We have city officials here tonight, Zuri. We have billionaires, and you show up looking like a street rat ready to beg for a handout." I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling absolutely nothing but pity for her shallow existence. "I am not here to beg for anything, Mother," I said calmly. But she was not listening. She never listened to me. "You have always been a curse on this family's legacy." Beatrice continued, pointing a manicured, trembling finger directly at my chest. "We worked too hard to build our name in this city. We climbed to the top so we would not have to deal with failures like you. Our friends in the country club ask about you, and I have to lie. I have to invent stories just to cover up the shame of having a daughter who could not even finish her degree. I told you years ago that you were no longer welcome in our circle. You bring your ghetto drama everywhere you go, and I will not let you destroy the most important night of your father's life. Security should have thrown you out onto the pavement the second you stepped off the curb." Before I could even open my mouth to respond to her vitriol, a heavy, unforgiving hand clamped down hard on my bicep. The grip was punishing, meant to control and intimidate. It was my father, Harrison. He pulled me roughly to the side, trying to shield the commotion from the VIP tables situated near the main stage. I looked up at him, hoping for just a fraction of a second that a father might intervene and defend his daughter from a public assault. I should have known better. Harrison's face was carved from stone, his eyes cold and entirely devoid of any paternal warmth. "Keep your voice down and stop making a scene," Harrison growled, his fingers digging painfully deep into my arm. "Do you have any idea what is at stake tonight? The governor is arriving in less than 20 minutes with his entire press team. We are about to secure the most lucrative commercial zoning contract in the history of the South Side. I am personally tearing down those old, useless historical blocks and cleansing that neighborhood of its trash. It is the crowning achievement of my career, and I will not have my uneducated failure of a daughter standing in the lobby reminding my investors of the one mistake I could not pave over." He released my arm with a violent, dismissive shove, pointing toward a set of swinging wooden doors meant only for the waitstaff. "Go through those doors," he ordered, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. "Walk through the kitchen, out the service exit, and go back to whatever pathetic, miserable life you are living. Do not speak to a single guest. Do not look at the event cameras. Just disappear. If I see your face in this ballroom again, I will personally have the police arrest you for trespassing. You are a complete embarrassment to the name Harrison. Now get out of my sight before I ruin you myself." I stand here in my penthouse now, looking out over the glittering city skyline, and I just smile. I remember looking at my father's furious red face. I remember watching my mother adjust her diamond necklace as if she had just swatted away an annoying fly. They looked at me with such absolute unfiltered disdain. They truly believed I was a helpless victim. They thought I was a scapegoat. They could just kick out the back door whenever my existence inconvenienced their ruthless climb to the top of the social ladder. They thought they held all the money, all the influence, and all the power. They thought I was just a dirty stain on their pristine, wealthy image. But what Harrison and Beatrice failed to realize is that I did not come to their luxurious party to eat their catered food or take family pictures. I came to collect a massive debt. They always thought I was a stain, but they had absolutely no idea that the shadow of that stain was about to swallow them whole. Harrison's grip on my arm was still tight, pushing me toward the swinging wooden doors of the kitchen. But before I could even brace my feet against the polished marble floor to stop him, a high, mocking laugh sliced right through the heavy tension. "Oh, let her stay, Harrison. The venue always needs someone to clean up after the real guests are done." I did not even have to turn around to know who that voice belonged to. It was Preston, my brother-in-law. He strolled into our little circle of hostility with my older sister Jasmine, draped over his arm like an expensive tailored accessory. Jasmine was the undisputed golden child of the family. She was wearing a breathtaking ruby-red gown that probably cost more than my first car, her neck heavy with diamonds. But it was Preston who commanded the space with the absolute, unearned arrogance that only a wealthy white man marrying into a prominent black family could weaponize. Preston looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my emerald silk dress, with a smirk of pure condescension. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored tuxedo, making sure the heavy gold Rolex on his wrist caught the light of the chandeliers. "Tell me, Zuri," Preston drawled, taking a sip from his crystal champagne flute. "Are you here to beg for money again? Because if your little startup ventures finally went bankrupt, I could probably find a spot for you at one of my construction sites. We are always looking for unskilled labor. Though knowing your track record, you would probably just abandon the job halfway through, just like you abandoned your education." Jasmine leaned into him, giggling softly as if he had just delivered a brilliant punchline. She looked at me with those cold, perfectly lined eyes, utterly devoid of any sisterly affection. "Really, Zuri? You could have at least tried to dress appropriately?" Jasmine sneered. "Mom and Dad have worked tirelessly to cultivate a pristine image for this family. We are hosting the absolute top tier of Atlanta society tonight. And here you are showing up out of nowhere, looking like you are about to start a brawl in the middle of a country club. You always did love to play the victim." I stared at the two of them. Jasmine and Preston were the perfect power couple in my parents' eyes. Jasmine provided the beautiful, educated, black excellence aesthetic, while Preston provided the ruthless old money white privilege that my father so desperately craved proximity to. Together they were untouchable. Or so they thought. They loved pushing this narrative that I was a financially ruined, unstable dropout who constantly needed handouts. It was a convenient lie that made them feel superior. "I am not here for your money, Preston," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "I would not take a single dime from you if I were starving on the street." Preston scoffed, taking a step closer to me. He towered over me, using his physical presence to try and intimidate me, a tactic he used on anyone he deemed beneath his tax bracket. He smelled of expensive scotch and unbridled greed. "You do not have a choice, Zuri," he said, his voice dropping into a harsh lecturing tone. "This family only has room for people who actually create value, people who understand how the real world works. Your father and I do not just sit around whining about fairness. We build empires. In fact, we just finalized the paperwork tonight. We officially secured the historic Southside District." The Southside District. The words hit the air between us like a physical blow. That was not just any piece of real estate. That was the beating heart of the local black community, the very neighborhood where our grandmother Big Mama had built her life and her legacy from the ground up. It was a place rich with history, struggle, and triumph. And my father was selling it out to his arrogant white son-in-law, to be bulldozed and gentrified into luxury shopping centers and overpriced condos. "We are completely clearing out those rundown, useless blocks," Preston boasted, tapping the face of his Rolex with a smug grin. "We are bringing in high-end retail luxury apartments and completely changing the demographic of the area. It is a multi-million-dollar revitalization project. The governor himself is coming tonight specifically to shake my hand and publicly endorse Capital Vanguard as the lead developer. It is the biggest financial victory this family has ever seen. So do us all a favor, Zuri. Take your ghetto attitude and your pathetic grudges out the back door. This room is for real players. I watched the sickening pride wash over my father's face as Preston spoke. Harrison was practically glowing, completely blind to the fact that he was actively participating in the erasure of his own heritage just to secure a seat at Preston's table. My mother Beatrice stood slightly behind them, her arms crossed, nodding in agreement as her son-in-law openly disrespected her own daughter and insulted her community. They had sold their souls for status. They were willing to let this man walk all over their bloodline as long as the checks kept clearing. They thought they had won. They thought they had secured the ultimate prize and successfully guarded their elite fortress against the one person who knew all their dirty secrets. Preston looked at me like I was an insect he was about to crush under his expensive Italian leather shoes. He thought his money and his skin color gave him the ultimate authority to dictate my worth. Jasmine chimed in again, waving her manicured hand dismissively. Just leave, Zuri. You are embarrassing yourself. You could never handle the pressure of the real business world. That is why you failed. Leave the legacy building to the adults before you ruin the one good thing this family has going for it. I felt the corners of my mouth slowly curve upward into a sharp, ice-cold smile. My heart was not racing. My palms were not sweating. I was entirely grounded in the absolute certainty of what was about to happen next. They had just handed me the exact weapon I needed, wrapped in a neat little bow of their own staggering hubris. They wanted to talk about creating value. They wanted to talk about the Southside District and real players. They wanted to treat me like dirt on their designer shoes. I stood my ground, refusing to break eye contact with Preston, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make his smug smile falter for a fraction of a second. I was not going to run out the back door. I was not going to shrink under the weight of their judgment. I was going to tear their pristine, arrogant world apart brick by brick, and I was going to start right now. I did not shed a single tear. I did not drop my gaze. I did not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break under the weight of their collective cruelty. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate breath and smoothed the crease in my emerald silk dress. I watched Jasmine cross her arms, waiting for me to run away, crying like the broken 22-year-old girl they had thrown out of their house a decade ago. I watched Preston tilt his chin up, utterly convinced of his own untouchable supremacy. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they could not see the trap closing around them. I opened my clutch. The heavy gold clasp clicked sharply, catching my father's attention. Harrison tensed his shoulders, likely thinking I was about to pull out a phone to record them or cause a loud, chaotic scene in the middle of the foyer. But I simply reached inside and pulled out a heavy matte black card attached to a thick silk lanyard. I let it dangle from my fingertips, the gold foil lettering catching the light from the massive crystal chandelier above us. I am not going to leave through the kitchen, Harrison, I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the tension and the faint sound of the jazz band playing in the background. And I certainly did not sneak past the front desk Beatrice. I stepped forward, closing the distance between Preston and myself. I held the heavy black card up, flipping it around so the gold-embossed text was right in his line of sight. "Read it out loud, Preston," I commanded. "Since you are the smartest, most successful real estate developer in the room, tell my parents exactly what this card says." Preston narrowed his pale eyes. He leaned in his arrogant smirk, faltering just a fraction of an inch as his gaze scanned the embossed letters. His jaw clenched tight. The muscles in his neck twitched. He did not speak. "Read it," I demanded again, my voice ringing with absolute unwavering authority. When he remained completely silent, I turned my attention to my mother. "It says Diamond Sponsor Beatrice. It means I did not just get a lucky invitation to this little high society gathering. I funded it." I looked at the crystal flute Preston was still holding in his hand. "That premium vintage champagne you are drinking right now. I paid for it." The towering custom ice sculptures you all happily took pictures in front of earlier tonight. I bought them. The luxury catering, the valet service, the string quartet playing over in the corner. Every single dime came directly from my company accounts. So, no, Preston, I am not here to apply for a cleaning job at one of your construction sites. I am the reason you have a venue to stand in tonight. Beatrice gasped loudly, her manicured hand flying up to clutch her diamond necklace. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and terrified. Harrison dropped his hand from my arm as if my skin had suddenly caught fire. He took a step back, staring at the black card in my hand, his mind desperately trying to calculate how the daughter he had written off as a complete failure could possibly possess that level of liquid capital. Jasmine was the first to break the stunned silence. Her voice was shrill, desperate to maintain her position as the superior golden child. "That is a lie," Jasmine spat out, stepping out from behind her husband and pointing a shaking finger at me. "You probably found that card on the floor, or you stole it from the registration desk when the staff was not looking. You do not have the kind of money to be a diamond sponsor. You dropped out of college. You have a criminal record. You have absolutely nothing." I turned my attention to my perfectly polished sister, looking at her with total calm. "My net worth is none of your concern, Jasmine. But I can assure you my bank accounts are just as authentic as this credential. You all spent the last 10 years telling everyone in your elite little circles that I was a lost cause. You told your country club friends that I was a burden. You cut me off without a single cent, assuming I would end up rotting in a gutter somewhere. You never even bothered to check if I actually stayed in that gutter." Preston recovered quickly. He was a man who refused to be publicly emasculated, especially by a black woman he deemed beneath him. He let out a harsh, barking laugh and tossed the rest of his champagne back. He handed the empty crystal flute to a passing waiter without even looking at the man, his eyes locked onto mine with renewed hostility. "Congratulations, Zuri," Preston said, clapping his hands together in a slow, mocking rhythm. "You scammed some gullible venture capital firm into giving you a flashy title and a corporate credit card. That is very cute. You can buy all the champagne in Atlanta, but sponsoring a party does not make you a player. It makes you a glorified event planner paying for access to a room you do not belong in." Beatrice grabbed Harrison's arm, her carefully constructed facade completely cracking under the pressure of societal panic. "Harrison, do something right now. If she really sponsored this event, the board members will find out. The press will ask questions. We cannot have her name associated with our brand. People will dig into her past. They will find out about the arrest. She is going to ruin everything we have built." Harrison squared his shoulders. His initial shock morphed back into the controlling rage I knew so well. "It does not matter whose name is on that card," Harrison ordered, his voice low and dangerous. "You are going to walk to the event coordinator right now and have your name removed from the sponsor list. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement stating you had no part in funding this gala. I will reimburse whatever shady company gave you that money, and you will leave immediately. You do not get to hijack my success. You do not get to buy your way back into this family just to embarrass us in front of the governor." I laughed. It was a genuine bright sound that made my father flinch visibly. "Reimburse me, Harrison. The diamond sponsorship for this event cost $250,000. Are you really going to pull $250,000 out of your personal accounts tonight just to protect your fragile ego? Because from what I have seen of your recent public filings, your cash flow is severely tied up in Preston's little pet projects. You do not have the liquidity to buy me out. I own my seat at this table and I am not giving it up." Preston let out a sharp, guttural sound of disbelief. He closed the distance between us in a single stride, his face flushing a deep, angry red. Before I could pull my hand back, he snatched the matte black lanyard right out of my grip. His large, pale hands closed around the thick card, and he bent it violently until the gold foil cracked and the heavy material snapped in half. He tossed the broken pieces onto the polished marble floor between my heels, his lips curling into a vicious snarl. "You think a piece of plastic means anything to me?" Preston demanded, his voice dropping into a harsh, vibrating register meant to intimidate. "You think I am stupid, Zuri? $250,000. You probably went to some back alley loan shark or drained a high-interest business credit card just to play dress-up for one night. You are drowning in debt just to stand in this lobby and pretend you are on our level. It is pathetic. He stepped even closer, invading my personal space, his expensive cologne mixing with the smell of stale champagne on his breath. He pointed a finger right at my face. Listen to me very carefully, you arrogant little brat. Tomorrow morning at exactly 9 o'clock, my company, Capital Vanguard, officially acquires the entire Southside District, every last inch of it. The ink is practically dry. I felt a sudden sharp spike of adrenaline hit my bloodstream. I clenched my fists at my sides, my fingernails digging half-moons into my palms. The South Side. He was not just talking about some random commercial real estate package. He was talking about the cultural heartbeat of our community. That district was the exact neighborhood where my grandmother Big Mama had built her life from the ground up. It was where she had scraped together enough money cleaning houses and taking in laundry to buy her first brownstone. It was a place rich with history, filled with Black-owned businesses, generational homes, and the very foundation of the wealth my father now used to buy his custom tuxedos. And now Preston was going to steal it. "We are bringing in the bulldozers by the end of the month," Preston boasted, his pale eyes gleaming with greedy, unrestrained delight. "We are flattening those dilapidated, useless brick houses and paving over the entire ghetto. I am replacing that blight with a multi-level luxury commercial hub, upscale dining designer boutiques, and premium high-rise condos. We are completely changing the demographic of the area. We are pushing out the trash to make room for people who actually have capital. It is a multi-billion-dollar revitalization project, and I am spearheading the entire thing." The sheer audacity of his words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. A wealthy white man was standing in the middle of a high-society gala, using my family's financial backing to erase our own history, and he was bragging about it directly to my face. He was calling my grandmother's legacy trash. He was referring to our people as a blight that needed to be cleansed. I looked past his smug face and stared directly at my father. I expected to see at least a flicker of hesitation in Harrison's eyes. I expected to see a shred of guilt or conflict. Big Mama had raised him on those very streets. She had sacrificed everything so he could have the capital to start his first real estate firm. But Harrison just stood there, his posture rigid, nodding in silent agreement with Preston. My own father was actively funding the erasure of his mother's legacy, just so his white son-in-law could play the ultimate real estate mogul. Harrison was willing to sell out his own bloodline for a seat at a table that did not even respect him. Jasmine smoothed a non-existent wrinkle on Preston's jacket, looking at me with absolute condescension. "It is called progress, Zuri?" she chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You would not understand because you are always stuck in the past, clinging to a neighborhood that has been dead for decades. Dad and Preston are elevating the city. Nobody cares about those old crumbling houses anymore. We are bringing real value to Atlanta. We are putting our family name on the map permanently." I looked at my sister. She was wearing a diamond necklace paid for by the same generational wealth she was currently cheering on being demolished. The self-hatred was staggering. She was fully complicit, standing arm in arm with a man who viewed her heritage as nothing more than an ugly stain on a lucrative zoning map. "You are a disgrace," I said, my voice dangerously low. "Both of you. You are letting him bulldoze the very house Big Mama built just so you can sip champagne with politicians who laugh at you behind your back." Preston scoffed loudly, shaking his head, as if I were a naive child who did not understand basic arithmetic. "It is business, Zuri. Keep your emotional garbage out of it. The contract for the Southside redevelopment is worth over $1 billion. The governor of Georgia is going to walk onto that stage in less than 10 minutes. He is going to shake my hand, look into the cameras, and publicly sign the state endorsement for Capital Vanguard to lead this city's urban renewal initiative." Preston tapped his heavy gold Rolex, checking the time with a triumphant smirk. He leaned in closer, his voice mocking and cruel. "So your little $250,000 stunt tonight, it is pocket change, it is absolute dust. You spent a fortune just to buy a fake title for a party that celebrates my victory. You are a nobody trying to interrupt a billion-dollar coronation. We hold the contracts. We hold the political backing. We hold the power. My mother Beatrice finally found her voice again. She stepped forward, her eyes darting nervously toward the grand ballroom doors, terrified that the governor might walk in and witness this confrontation. You heard him. Zuri Beatrice snapped her tone frantic. You have lost. You have always been a loser, and tonight just proves it. Now pick up your broken little plastic card from the floor and leave this building before I call the police and have you dragged out in handcuffs. I will not let you ruin your sister's triumph. They looked at me with absolute certainty. They believed their victory was already sealed in ink. They believed Preston's ruthless corporate takeover was a done deal, and that I was completely powerless to stop the destruction of the South Side. They were so intoxicated by the illusion of their own supremacy that they failed to realize one crucial detail about the corporate food chain. There is always a bigger fish. I did not look down at the broken pieces of my sponsor card. I did not shed a tear for the harsh words my mother spit at me. Instead, I let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. I looked directly into Preston's pale, arrogant eyes, watching the faint shadow of confusion flicker behind his overwhelming confidence. He thought he was the ultimate predator in the room. He thought he had outsmarted everyone. He was about to learn a very painful lesson about the danger of assuming you know who holds the paper. Preston stared at me, a flicker of genuine confusion finally breaking through his arrogant facade. He was a man used to people shrinking under his threats, but I was looking at him like he was nothing more than an obstacle I had already calculated how to remove. Jasmine noticed her husband's sudden, uncharacteristic silence. Her perfectly manicured fingers tightened around Preston's bicep. She tossed her long, silk-pressed hair over her shoulder and let out a sharp, mocking laugh that was entirely too loud for the elegant foyer. Jasmine could not stand losing control of the narrative, and she certainly could not stand seeing anyone, especially me, rattle the wealthy white husband she wore like a badge of honor. "Let it go, darling," Jasmine cooed, leaning her weight against Preston while shooting me a look of pure, concentrated venom. "Why are you even wasting your breath arguing with someone who has a criminal record? It does not matter how much money she claims to have scammed out of some shadow investors. If the governor walks into this venue tonight and finds out one of the main sponsors is a literal convicted felon, Dad is going to be an absolute laughingstock." Jasmine turned to our father, pitching her voice to sound like the concerned, protective daughter. "Can you imagine the press, Dad? A diamond sponsor who has actually seen the inside of a jail cell. The media would have a field day with us. She is just trying to drag our reputation down to her level because she knows she will always be nothing but ghetto trash. In our world, the exclusive, highly guarded circles of Atlanta's black elite, a criminal record was the ultimate social death sentence. It was the one permanent stain you could never scrub out with money or charity donations. Jasmine wielded that word like a bloodied sword, fully expecting me to cower. She expected me to drop my eyes in shame, to remember my place at the absolute bottom of the family hierarchy, and to run out the back door in tears just like I used to when we were younger. But I did not shrink. I did not look away. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate step forward, completely erasing the polite physical distance between us. I stepped so close to my sister that I could smell the heavy, cloying scent of her expensive floral perfume, mixing with the sudden, sharp, metallic tang of her own nervous sweat. "A criminal record," I repeated, my voice dropping into a register so dangerously quiet and sharp it cut right through the ambient noise of the gala. Jasmine's breath hitched. She tried to maintain her haughty expression, but her eyes darted frantically toward Preston, then toward our mother. "Are you referring to that night exactly 10 years ago, Jasmine?" I asked, locking my gaze onto hers, refusing to let her look away. "Because I remember that night vividly. I remember the flashing blue and red police lights illuminating the leather interior of your brand new graduation car. I remember the police officer tapping his heavy metal flashlight against the driver's side window. And most importantly, Jasmine, I remember the absolute terror on your face when the officer found the bag of narcotics stuffed deep inside the center console." Jasmine went rigid. All the color drained from her perfectly contoured face, leaving her looking hollow and gray. Beatrice let out a sharp gasp, taking a step forward as if she could physically shove the words back down my throat. "Those were your drugs, Jasmine." I continued, my voice steady, rhythmic, and relentless. "The ones you bought to celebrate the end of your senior year with your private school friends. You were sobbing uncontrollably on the side of the highway. You were begging the officer, telling him it would completely ruin your life. And then Mom and Dad arrived at the precinct." I shifted my intense gaze to Beatrice. My mother was now trembling visibly, her hand clutching her diamond necklace so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "I remember exactly what you did that night, Mother. You pulled me into a sterile, freezing interrogation room. You grabbed my shoulders, digging your expensive acrylic nails into my skin until I bled, and you looked me dead in the eye. Do you remember what you told me? Because those words have echoed in my head every single day for the last decade." Harrison stepped forward, his face flushed with panic. "Shut your mouth right now, Zuri. We are in public." I ignored him entirely, keeping my eyes fixed on Beatrice as I mimicked her frantic, calculating tone from that horrible night. "You looked at me and said, 'Zuri is a lost cause anyway. Her grades are terrible. She is barely scraping by. But Jasmine is brilliant. Jasmine has a completely clean record and an acceptance letter to Howard University waiting on the kitchen counter at home. We cannot let a drug charge ruin Jasmine's bright, beautiful future. You have to take the fall for your sister, Zuri. You have to tell the police those drugs belong to you. It is the only way to save this family." The silence that fell over our small circle was deafening. The jazz music continued to play cheerfully in the background, a sickening contrast to the heavy, suffocating truth I had just laid bare. "You sacrificed me," I stated, my voice ringing off the marble pillars. "You threw your own 18-year-old daughter to the wolves. You let me take a felony charge, let me get strip-searched and locked in a holding cell, just so your golden child could go pledge a sorority and play the perfect, untouchable black elite princess. You branded me a criminal before my adult life even started, all to protect the family image." Preston stared at his wife, his pale eyes narrowing with profound shock. He slowly pulled his arm out of Jasmine's grasp. He had clearly never heard this version of the story. Jasmine had always played the flawless, morally superior victim who had to endure a troubled, delinquent younger sister. To hear that her pristine academic and social record was bought with my blood and my freedom was a massive crack in the foundation of their perfect, arrogant marriage. Jasmine opened her mouth to speak, to offer some kind of defense, but her throat bobbed silently. She had absolutely no excuse because we both knew every single word I said was the absolute truth. "You thought giving me a criminal record would break me," I said, looking back at my father, whose jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. "You thought it would guarantee that I could never get a traditional corporate job, never get approved for a standard bank loan, never build a legitimate, respectable life. And you were right. I could not do things the traditional way. I could not walk through the front door of polite society with a felony attached to my name." I took a step back, taking in the horrified faces of the people who were supposed to love and protect me. So I had to learn how to pick the locks. I had to learn how to operate in the dark. I built my wealth dealing with distressed assets, buying up bad debt, and becoming completely ruthless in spaces where background checks did not matter as long as the cash cleared. You turned me into a monster, just to keep Jasmine's hands clean. And now you are all terrified because the monster you created is standing in your lobby, and she is the one holding the deed to your entire legacy. Beatrice's perfectly manicured hands shook violently as the weight of my words settled over the small crowd that had started gathering around us. High society thrives on whispers, and right now we were giving them a feast. Beatrice saw the inquisitive stares from the wives of city councilmen and local judges. Her entire social currency was actively bleeding out onto the polished marble floor. She desperately waved her hand in the air, frantically signaling the two massive security guards stationed near the entrance of the grand ballroom. "Remove her!" Beatrice shrieked, no longer caring about her volume or her carefully maintained poise. "She is trespassing. She is causing a public disturbance. Get her out of this club immediately before I have you all fired." Harrison puffed out his chest, stepping back to let the guards do the dirty work. He adjusted his silk bow tie, trying desperately to reclaim his wounded dignity in front of his wealthy peers. "You heard her," Harrison commanded. "Drag her out, and make sure she does not steal any silverware on the way out the door. The head of security, a towering, broad-shouldered man named Davis, who had worked at the Piedmont Elite Club for over a decade, marched over with a stern and unreadable expression. His heavy boots thudded against the marble. Preston chuckled, pulling Jasmine closer to his side, a look of absolute triumph washing over his pale face. "Enjoy the walk back to the gutters, Zuri," Preston mocked loudly. "Maybe they will let you keep your broken plastic lanyard as a souvenir of the night you tried to play with the adults." I did not move a single muscle. I just stood there, my hands relaxed at my sides, watching Davis approach. But Davis stepped right past Preston. He stepped right past my father. He stopped directly in front of me, clasped his hands firmly behind his back, and offered a deep, highly respectful nod. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" Davis asked, his deep voice booming with absolute deference. "Do you need me to escort these individuals away from your vicinity?" The collective gasp from my family was intoxicating. It was sweeter than any champagne they were serving tonight. Beatrice clutched her chest, as if she had just taken a physical bullet. Harrison's jaw dropped open, his eyes darting frantically between me and the massive security guard. Preston's smug smile vanished instantly, replaced by a deep defensive scowl that exposed the fragile ego hiding beneath his expensive suit. "What in the world are you doing?" Harrison demanded, his voice cracking with outrage and confusion. "I am a platinum member here. I pay your salary. I ordered you to throw this woman out into the street." I smoothly brushed a piece of imaginary lint off the skirt of my emerald dress, taking my time before I answered. "You pay a monthly membership fee, Harrison," I said calmly. "But I pay the payroll. My firm acquired the primary vendor contracts for this facility last month, including the private security detail. Davis answers exclusively to me. So unless you want to spend the rest of your 60th birthday celebration in the back of a squad car for threatening the owner of the security firm, I highly suggest you lower your voice and step back." Jasmine let out a strangled noise, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. The reality of the situation was finally beginning to penetrate her thick skull. She had spent her entire life believing I was a worthless charity case, a criminal who would never amount to anything. Seeing a room full of powerful men defer to me was shattering her fragile reality. Preston, however, was a man who refused to be publicly emasculated, especially by a black woman he deemed entirely beneath him. His white privilege was flaring up, blinding him to the very real danger he was currently standing in. He aggressively stepped forward, pointing a rigid finger directly at my face. "You think buying out some local security guards makes you a threat?" Preston spat his face, turning a blotchy shade of red. "You are playing parlor tricks. It does not change a single thing about tomorrow morning. My firm still holds the development rights. Capital Vanguard is untouchable. The South Side District belongs to me, and there is absolutely nothing your petty little vendettas can do to stop my bulldozers." I looked at Preston, genuinely marveling at how easily extreme arrogance masks severe incompetence. He was so utterly convinced of his own supremacy that he never bothered to look over his shoulder. He never bothered to check who was holding the leash. "Capital Vanguard," I repeated slowly, letting the name roll off my tongue like a curse. "You boast about your company like you actually own it, Preston. You strut around this gala acting like a self-made titan of industry. But we both know the ugly truth. Your firm is drowning in toxic debt. You wildly overleveraged your assets to buy up those Southside properties, and you used my father's money as collateral to secure the loans." Preston's facial muscles twitched. A tiny bead of sweat broke out along his hairline. "That is standard corporate strategy," he shot back, though his voice lacked its previous booming confidence. "The loans are fully secured. We are backed by a massive parent conglomerate. You do not know the first thing about high-level finance. Secured by a parent company that recently sold off its entire portfolio of distressed debt to a private venture capital fund," I corrected him. I took a slow, deliberate step closer until I was looking right up into his pale, terrified eyes. "You really should read the fine print on your corporate acquisitions, brother-in-law. Because when a venture capital firm buys up your debt, they hold the strings to your entire operation. They own your buildings. They own your contracts. They own you." I tilted my head, flashing him a smile that promised absolute ruin. Tell me, Preston, have you ever been curious to see who actually sits as the CEO of the shadow fund that bought up all of Capital Vanguard's liabilities? Preston opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The absolute arrogant certainty that had defined his entire existence shattered in a fraction of a second, leaving behind nothing but a gaping, terrified void. He stared at me as if I had just morphed into a ghost right in front of his eyes. But before Preston could formulate a single word, my father intervened. Harrison realized that the whispers around us were growing louder. The elite guests of Atlanta were leaning in their champagne glasses, lowered their eyes, fixed hungrily on our crumbling family portrait. Harrison could not afford a public execution. With a sudden violent motion, Harrison lunged forward. He did not grab my arm this time. He knew better after seeing the head of security bow to me. Instead, he grabbed Jasmine by the wrist and barked an order at Beatrice and Preston. Harrison stepped right into my personal space, his eyes manic and wide. "We are taking this off the floor right now," Harrison growled, his voice a low, vibrating threat. "Walk to the executive lounge. Do it quietly, or I swear to God I will drag you there myself." I did not need to be dragged. I smoothed my dress and walked perfectly in step beside him. I wanted them in a closed room just as much as they did. I wanted to watch them drop their masks without the entire city watching. Harrison ushered us down a dimly lit velvet-lined hallway away from the grand ballroom. He shoved the heavy oak double doors of the private VIP lounge open and herded Jasmine, Beatrice, and Preston inside. I walked in right behind them. The moment I crossed the threshold, Harrison slammed the doors shut, throwing the heavy brass deadbolt into place. The sudden silence was deafening. The cheerful, upbeat jazz music from the Gala was completely severed, leaving us trapped in a suffocating room that smelled of stale cigar smoke and aged leather. The second that lock clicked into place, the distinguished, polished patriarch of the Harrison family completely vanished. The man who had spent the last hour shaking hands with billionaires and smiling for event photographers was replaced by a cornered, vicious tyrant. "What did you just say out there?" Harrison roared, his voice bouncing violently off the mahogany-paneled walls. He marched toward me, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. His veins bulged against the stiff collar of his custom tuxedo. "CEO of an investment fund?" Harrison spat the words out as if they were poison. "Are you out of your mind? Do you think I am an idiot? Where did you get the money to buy a security firm? Where did you get the money to sponsor this event? You are nothing but an uneducated dropout with a felony record. You have absolutely nothing. You are a complete fraud trying to play a high-stakes game to extort your own family." I sit here on my sofa in my penthouse right now, swirling the bourbon in my glass, and I just laugh at the memory of his face. I watch the city lights bleed through my floor-to-ceiling windows, and I feel nothing but absolute triumph. They stripped away my future. They sacrificed my entire life to protect a lie. So I built a future they could never reach. I built a fortress of wealth and power using the exact same ruthlessness they taught me. They created the monster that came back to consume them. Inside that VIP room, the panic was becoming infectious. Beatrice began pacing the length of the Persian rug, her silver gown rustling aggressively with every frantic step. She was hyperventilating, her hands pulling at her meticulously styled hair. "You ruined it!" Beatrice shrieked, pointing at me while looking at Jasmine. "She just told everyone about the drugs. The wives of the city councilmen heard her. The judges heard her. Jasmine, your entire reputation is destroyed. If the Howard Alumni Association hears about this, if the hospital board finds out you let your sister take a felony charge for you, your medical license will be scrutinized. We are ruined." Jasmine collapsed onto a tufted leather sofa, burying her face in her hands. The golden child was finally cracking under the weight of her own preserved lies. She sobbed, rocking back and forth, mourning her social status, while completely ignoring the 10 years of suffering I had endured to buy her that very status. I did not even look at her. My eyes were fixed on Preston. Preston had retreated to the far corner of the room. He was not yelling. He was not defending his wife. He had his smartphone out, his pale fingers flying across the screen with desperate, trembling speed. He was logging into his corporate portals, checking the secure financial emails he had ignored all evening while he was busy drinking champagne and feeling invincible. "Stop checking your phone, Preston," I said coldly. The room fell entirely silent except for Jasmine's pathetic weeping. I took a step toward the center of the room, claiming the space, forcing all of them to look at me. "It is already done." The private equity group that held the leverage on Capital Vanguard was liquidated at noon yesterday. The assets were transferred to Obsidian Holdings. I am the sole managing partner of Obsidian Holdings. I own your debt, Preston. Which means I own your company. I own your bulldozers. I own your construction permits. And I own the Southside development rights. Preston's head snapped up. His face was completely drained of blood, making his skin look like chalk. He stared at his phone screen, his mouth opening and closing, without producing a single sound. He looked like a man who had just watched his own execution broadcasted live. "She is not lying," Preston whispered, his voice cracking horribly. The arrogant, booming tone was entirely gone. He looked at Harrison with wide, terrified eyes. "The parent company sold the debt packages. The emails just came through. I am locked out of the primary vendor accounts. Capital Vanguard is functionally insolvent unless the new holding company authorizes the operational funds." Harrison froze. He looked at his white son-in-law, the man he had practically worshipped for his old money connections, and realized he had aligned himself with a sinking ship. Harrison turned his furious glare back to me. He refused to accept defeat. He refused to believe that the daughter he threw away had somehow climbed higher than he ever could. "Who is backing you?" Harrison demanded, marching right up to my face, trying to use his height to intimidate me. I did not flinch. I did not step back. "You are a front." Harrison continued, his voice dripping with desperate denial. "Some white billionaire is using you as a diversity face for Obsidian Holdings. There is no way you did this yourself. You do not have the education. You do not have the pedigree. How did a girl with a felony and no college degree get the seed money to start a venture capital firm in the first place? You need millions just to get a seat at those tables. Who gave you the initial capital, Zuri? Who is pulling your strings?" He was practically foaming at the mouth. He needed me to be a puppet. He needed to believe that I was still dependent on someone else, because the alternative, that I had outsmarted and out-earned him on my own, was a reality his massive ego simply could not process. Beatrice stopped pacing. She looked at me, her chest heaving, waiting for me to confess to some criminal enterprise. She wanted me to admit that I was a fraud, so she could finally breathe again. I looked at my father, taking in his sweating forehead and his clenched, shaking fists. I looked at my mother, desperately clinging to her pearls. I looked at Jasmine, weeping on the sofa over a reputation built on my sacrifice. And I looked at Preston, the arrogant outsider who thought he could bulldoze my grandmother's legacy using my family's money. They wanted to know where my seed money came from. They wanted to know exactly how I had funded the empire that was currently crushing them to dust. They were demanding the truth, completely unaware that the truth was going to be the final nail in their coffins. I reached inside the structured inner pocket of my emerald silk jacket and pulled out a thick, folded legal document. A massive, undeniably official red notary seal was stamped directly across the front page. I did not hand it to my father. I threw it down onto the glass coffee table separating us. The heavy packet of paper hit the glass with a sharp, violent smack that made my mother physically jump back. "You want to know where my initial capital came from?" I asked, my voice echoing off the mahogany walls of the private lounge. It came directly from Big Mama's house. The color drained out of Harrison's face so fast he looked as though he might collapse. Beatrice brought both hands up to cover her mouth, her eyes darting frantically toward the locked doors as if she could somehow escape the reality of what I had just said. "That is impossible," Harrison stammered, his confident posture completely folding. "That house was lost. The bank took it. There was nothing left to salvage." "It was lost because you let them take it." "Harrison," I shot back, taking a slow, predatory step around the coffee table. "Do not stand there and play the victim. I know exactly what you and Beatrice did. You took a historic brownstone, a property completely paid off with the blood, sweat, and tears of a hardworking black woman, and you secretly mortgaged it to the hilt. You took out predatory high-interest loans against your own mother's ancestral home while she was on her deathbed. I turned my gaze to Jasmine and Preston, who were currently staring at my parents in absolute shock. I pointed a finger right at my arrogant white brother-in-law. You bled that property dry just so you could buy Preston a luxury sports car to keep up his wealthy facade. You drained Big Mama's equity to fund Jasmine's extravagant destination wedding because you needed to impress your elite superficial friends. You financed this entire fake high society lifestyle using the stolen equity of a woman who scrubbed floors so you could go to college. And when the money ran out, you completely stopped paying the mortgage. You let the bank send foreclosure notices to a dead woman. You threw away our family history just to buy a seat at Preston's table. Beatrice was shaking violently now, her silver gown trembling as she tried to find the words to defend her absolute betrayal. We had to keep up appearances, Zuri Beatrice cried out, her voice cracking with pathetic desperation. We had to maintain our status in the community. You do not understand the pressure of our position. The house was old, it was a burden. We thought the bank taking it was the easiest way to wipe our hands clean of the neighborhood. You thought I was just the family scapegoat, I said, my voice dropping into a deadly razor-sharp whisper. You thought I was just the quiet, broken daughter who was going to sweep up your mess and disappear. You assumed the bank seized the property and auctioned it off to strangers. But you were wrong. I did not just clean up your trash, Beatrice. I bought it. I used the very first profits from my consulting work to quietly purchase the defaulted debt. I redeemed the house. I paid off every single cent of the toxic loans you took out, and I took full legal possession of Big Mama's property. Harrison gripped the back of a leather armchair, his knuckles turning white as he struggled to breathe. You bought the house, he whispered, as if the concept of me possessing real estate was physically painful for him to comprehend. That is not even the best part, Harrison, I said, a dark, victorious smile spreading across my face. Because when I finally took possession of the house, I started doing the restoration work you were always too lazy to do. I pulled up the rotting floorboards in Big Mama's old sewing room, and underneath those floorboards, I found the fireproof safe you spent weeks tearing the house apart trying to find. I found the real documents. I found the authentic original will. The silence in the VIP lounge was so absolute you could hear the faint ticking of Preston's gold Rolex. Big Mama was old, but she was never stupid. I continued making sure my father heard every single agonizing syllable. She knew exactly what kind of man you had become, Harrison. She watched you obsess over country club memberships and white validation. She knew the second she closed her eyes for good, you were going to sell out the entire Southside community to the highest bidder. She knew you were going to let developers like Preston bulldoze the very streets that raised you. I picked up the red-stamped legal document from the glass table and held it up right in front of my father's terrified face. So Big Mama went to a private attorney behind your back. 7 years ago, long before she got sick, she legally transferred the master deeds for every single commercial block she owned in the Southside District. She took the entire neighborhood out of your name and placed it into an ironclad, irrevocable blind trust. And she named one single solitary beneficiary to inherit the entire empire, me. Jasmine let out a blood-curdling scream. She grabbed her own hair, her perfect, pristine image completely shattering as the reality of her lost inheritance washed over her. "You are lying!" Jasmine shrieked, stomping her foot on the Persian rug like a spoiled toddler. "She would never leave everything to you. You are a dropout. You are a criminal. We are the successful ones. We are the face of this family. She left it to me because I am the only one who actually respects where we came from." I fired back, completely shutting down my sister's hysterical outburst. "She left it to me because she knew I would never sell our people out to a corporate parasite like your husband." I turned my attention back to Preston, who was currently staring at the red-stamped document in my hand with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. The arrogant swagger was entirely gone. His pale face was slick with a cold, terrified sweat. "You see the problem here, Preston?" I asked, tilting my head with mock sympathy. You have spent the last 6 months aggressively leveraging Capital Vanguard's assets to acquire the Southside development rights. You just bragged to me about finalizing the paperwork with my father tonight. But Harrison did not own those development rights. He has not owned a single square inch of the South Side for 7 years. Preston's breath hitched. He stumbled back until his shoulders hit the mahogany wall. The realization of his catastrophic failure was visibly crushing his chest. Harrison sold you fraudulent deeds, Preston, I stated, driving the final nail into his corporate coffin. My father forged his ownership to secure your investment money, which means the billion-dollar contract you are about to present to the governor of Georgia tonight is completely legally void. You just bet your entire company, your entire personal fortune, and your pristine white reputation on a piece of land that belongs exclusively to me. Preston slowly turned his head to look at Harrison. The false camaraderie, the shared arrogance, the entire foundation of their toxic partnership dissolved into pure visceral hatred. You sold me stolen land, Preston growled, his voice trembling with a terrifying, violent rage. I leveraged my investors' capital on your word, Harrison. You told me you owned the district. You told me it was a clean title. You set me up for federal fraud. I did not know, Harrison pleaded, holding his hands up in a pathetic attempt to defend himself against his furious son-in-law. I swear to you, Preston, I thought the deeds were clean. I thought my mother left it all to me. I had no idea this ungrateful brat stole my inheritance. I did not steal anything, Harrison, I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality. I just secured the bag you were too busy dropping. Big Mama knew you were a sellout, and she made sure you would never profit off her sacrifice. You are a fraud, Harrison. You are a broke, desperate fraud wearing a $100,000 tuxedo, and your entire empire is built on dust. Beatrice stepped directly into my line of sight, her face contorting into something genuinely ugly. The refined country club matriarch vanished completely, replaced by a desperate, cornered narcissist whose entire reality was currently crumbling into ashes. She did not apologize. She did not fall to her knees and beg for forgiveness for conspiring to steal my inheritance or for selling out her own mother's legacy. She did not express a single ounce of remorse for letting me believe for 7 years that I was entirely alone in the world. Instead, Beatrice doubled down with a level of toxic delusion that was almost breathtaking to witness. She pointed a manicured finger at my face, her hand shaking so violently the diamond bracelets on her wrist clattered against each other. You are a child of this family, Beatrice hissed, her voice vibrating with irrational fury. You owe us your absolute loyalty. We gave you life. We put a roof over your head. If we needed to leverage that decaying old property to secure Jasmine and Preston's future, then it was your duty to step aside and let it happen. You are supposed to sacrifice for the greater good of this family. I looked at my mother, marveling at the sheer audacity of her logic. The greater good, I repeated, keeping my tone deadly calm. You mean funding your luxury vacations. You mean buying Preston a seat at tables he did not earn. You mean protecting Jasmine from a felony drug charge by throwing me to the police. That is not the greater good, Beatrice. That is parasitism. You are all just feeding off my blood and Big Mama's sweat. Beatrice slammed her hands down on the back of the leather sofa, her silver gown shimmering under the dim lounge lights. Money does not change who you are. Zuri, she spat out, her eyes blazing with desperate malice. You might have found a legal loophole to secure some cash, but you are still the exact same uncultured, defiant little girl we threw out. You have money, but you do not have power. You do not have the pedigree. You do not have the network. And you certainly do not have the political backing that we have cultivated for decades. Preston, who had been leaning against the mahogany wall in a state of hyperventilating shock, suddenly stood up straighter. Beatrice's words seemed to throw a lifeline to his suffocating ego. He was a white man born into privilege, fundamentally wired to believe that the system would always eventually bend to his will, no matter how many laws he had broken or how fraudulent his contracts were. He adjusted his tailored tuxedo jacket, wiping the cold sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. Your mother is right, Preston said, his voice regaining a fraction of its former booming arrogance. You think a single trust document makes you a god in this city? You are completely delusional, Zuri. Do you really think the state government cares about your grandmother's secret will? We are talking about a multi-billion-dollar commercial zoning project. We are talking about massive tax incentives and thousands of jobs. The state wants this development. The city council wants this development. Preston took a step toward me, a vicious, calculating gleam returning to his pale eyes. I have the governor of Georgia literally walking into the grand ballroom right now to endorse my firm. Governor Sterling and I play golf together. His campaign is heavily funded by my parent company. If you try to block my bulldozers with your little piece of paper, I will have the governor declare the entire Southside District a blighted area. I will have the state seize your precious historic property through eminent domain. I will tie you up in aggressive litigation for the next 20 years until your venture capital fund bleeds dry paying legal fees. Harrison's posture completely transformed. A sickening wave of relief washed over my father's face as he realized Preston was offering them a political way out of federal fraud. Harrison latched onto the idea with the desperation of a drowning man finding a piece of driftwood. He puffed out his chest, stepping right back up beside his wealthy son-in-law, entirely willing to let Preston use corrupt political power to steal the land his own mother had left to her granddaughter. You hear that Harrison sneered, a triumphant, ugly smile spreading across his face. You can hold all the red-stamped deeds you want, Zuri, but as long as we have the state government backing us, you are absolutely nothing. You are a minor nuisance. We have the governor in our pocket. We have the legislation on our side. You are just a rat trying to fight a freight train. You can either sell the Southside Trust over to Capital Vanguard right now for a fraction of the cost, or we will let the state rip it out of your hands for pennies. Jasmine wiped her tear-streaked face, her posture stiffening as she realized her husband was planning to crush me using his political connections. The golden child smirk slowly returned to her lips. She looked at me with profound superiority. You really thought you had won, Jasmine mocked. You really thought you could just walk in here, throw some paperwork on the table, and destroy my life. You are so pathetic, Zuri. You will always be the loser at the bottom of the barrel. I stood perfectly still in the center of the room. I did not argue with them. I did not raise my voice to match their shouting. I did not try to explain the intricacies of state property law or the absolute foolishness of threatening eminent domain against a federally recognized historic preservation trust. I just looked at the four of them, marveling at how predictably their minds worked. They were so deeply infected by their own classism and their reliance on Preston's white privilege that they genuinely believed a corrupt politician would save them from an airtight legal contract. They were digging their own graves, and I was more than happy to hand them the shovels. I just tilted my head and gave Preston a slow, razor-sharp smile. "You are going to use the governor to seize my land?" I asked softly. "That is a fascinating strategy, Preston. I highly encourage you to go out to that ballroom and pitch that exact idea to him. I am sure Governor Sterling will be incredibly receptive to bailing out a developer who just committed federal bank fraud using forged deeds." Before Preston could open his mouth to deliver another arrogant threat, a sharp, frantic knocking shattered the heavy tension in the room. The heavy brass handle of the VIP lounge door rattled aggressively. Harrison frowned, turning his head toward the entrance. "Mr. Harrison," a muffled, panicked voice called out from the hallway. It was the lead event coordinator for the gala, sounding completely out of breath. "Mr. Harrison, are you in there? Please open the door immediately." Harrison shot me a final warning glare before marching over to the heavy oak doors. He unlatched the brass deadbolt and pulled the door open just a few inches, blocking the coordinator from seeing inside the room. "What is the meaning of this?" Harrison barked, his tone instantly reverting to the demanding, wealthy patriarch. "I told you I was not to be disturbed under any circumstances." The event coordinator looked absolutely terrified, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Sir, I apologize profoundly, but Governor Sterling has arrived in the grand foyer." A collective wave of validation seemed to wash over my family. Beatrice stood up taller, smoothing the front of her silver gown. Jasmine quickly wiped the remaining smeared mascara from under her eyes, preparing to step back out into the spotlight. Preston puffed out his chest, throwing me a victorious, condescending glare. He truly believed his political savior had just walked through the front doors to crown him the king of Atlanta real estate. "Tell the governor we will be out to greet him in exactly 2 minutes," Harrison instructed the coordinator, his voice dripping with smug self-importance. "Have the photographers ready near the main stage." "Sir, you do not understand!" The coordinator interrupted, his voice trembling with sheer panic. The governor bypassed the press line completely. He refused the champagne reception. He is highly agitated. He said he has absolutely no interest in shaking hands right now. He specifically demanded that we find the legal title holder of the Southside development and bring them to the main stage immediately. He said there is a massive emergency regarding the zoning contracts, and he needs to address the owner right this second. Harrison's eyes widened, but his suffocating ego immediately misinterpreted the situation. He assumed the governor was eager to bypass the pleasantries and fast-track the billion-dollar announcement. He assumed the political machine was hungry to get the deal signed and finalized tonight. Harrison let out a sharp, breathless laugh of pure relief. He turned back to look at me, his face glowing with absolute arrogant triumph. "Do you hear that?" Zuri Harrison sneered, his voice echoing in the small room. "The governor is demanding to see the developer. He wants to push the Southside project through right now. Your little trust fund stunt means absolutely nothing." Harrison stepped out into the hallway, motioning for Beatrice, Jasmine, and Preston to follow him. Preston adjusted his tie, shooting me a final look of utter disgust. "Have fun sitting in the dark, Zuri," Preston mocked. "I will be sure to send you a postcard from the luxury penthouse I build right on top of your grandmother's grave." Jasmine linked her arm through her husband's, refusing to even look at me as she strutted out of the room. Beatrice followed right behind them, her head held high, stepping back into the glittering illusion of her high society life. Harrison stood in the doorway, his hand resting on the heavy brass handle. He looked at me, standing alone in the center of the VIP lounge, the red-stamped legal documents resting on the glass coffee table in front of me. "You can stay in here and hug your worthless pile of scrap paper," Harrison spat, his voice filled with cruel, triumphant finality. "When I am done on that stage, I will send my security to escort you out the back door where you belong." Harrison stepped out into the hallway and pulled the heavy oak doors shut. A second later, I heard the distinct heavy click of the exterior lock sliding into place. He had locked me inside the VIP lounge. He thought he was trapping me in a cage so I could not ruin his crowning moment. He thought he was leaving me behind in the dark while he walked out into the blinding flash of the press cameras to claim his ultimate victory. I stood completely alone in the silent room. I did not panic. I did not run to the door and pound my fists against the wood. I just picked up my glass of bourbon from the side table, took a slow, satisfying sip, and smiled. Harrison had just locked the door, but he had absolutely no idea that I held the master key to the entire building. He was walking out to a stage to claim a kingdom that had already crumbled, and he was about to do it in front of every powerful person in the state. Harrison genuinely believed a standard brass deadbolt was going to keep me contained. He thought he could just turn a key, walk away, and completely silence the biggest threat to his fraudulent empire. It was almost comedic how little my father understood about the modern power structures he tried so desperately to climb. He lived in an outdated world of old money handshakes, country club politics, and intimidation tactics. He was completely ignorant to the fact that real power no longer rested in loud voices and locked doors. Real power rested in infrastructure, digital control, and absolute ownership. I did not bang my fists against the heavy oak wood. I did not scream for someone to let me out. I did not shed a single tear of frustration. I simply reached into my emerald silk clutch and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the proprietary security application that controlled the entire Piedmont Elite Club. When Obsidian Holdings acquired the primary vendor contracts for this facility last month, I made sure my personal biometric data was encrypted directly into the master override protocol. I did not need a physical key to escape my father's pathetic little trap. I owned the grid. I pressed my thumb against the cool glass screen. A tiny green checkmark illuminated the display. Less than a second later, the heavy electronic mechanism inside the oak door disengaged with a loud, satisfying click. I pushed the heavy doors open and stepped back out into the velvet-lined hallway. I took a moment to smooth the front of my dress, ensuring not a single crease betrayed the absolute war I was about to unleash. I walked toward the grand ballroom with slow, measured steps. The vibrant, booming sounds of the jazz band had been replaced by the focused, anticipatory murmur of Atlanta's highest society. The entire room had shifted its attention to the main stage. I slipped quietly through the towering mahogany doors, blending seamlessly into the back of the massive crowd. The ballroom was packed shoulder to shoulder with billionaires, state senators, and legacy real estate tycoons. Everyone held their crystal champagne flutes, their eyes glued to the opulent platform at the front of the room. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and unbridled ambition. There they were. Harrison and Preston stood front and center on the elevated stage, basking in the blinding glow of the press cameras. They looked like two arrogant conquerors surveying a kingdom they had just plundered. Beatrice was standing just off to the side of the stage, her chest puffed out with artificial pride, her silver gown sparkling under the intense spotlights. She looked exactly like the hollow, status-obsessed socialite she had always been. Jasmine was positioned dead center in the front row, looking up at her white husband with an expression of pure, unadulterated worship. She was playing the perfect, supportive elite wife, completely blind to the fact that her entire lifestyle was funded by stolen equity. Standing slightly apart from my father and brother-in-law was Governor Sterling. The governor was a shrewd, highly calculating politician. His face was entirely unreadable, a rigid mask of professional neutrality. His posture was stiff, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. Any competent, observant businessman would have immediately recognized the aggressive, guarded tension radiating from the governor. But Harrison and Preston were completely blinded by their own colossal egos. They violently misinterpreted his rigid silence as eager anticipation. They genuinely believed the most powerful man in Georgia had rushed to this gala specifically to crown them the undisputed kings of Atlanta real estate. Preston stepped up to the crystal podium, gripping the edges with his large, pale hands. He leaned into the microphone, his face flushed with the intoxicating rush of unearned supremacy. "Ladies and gentlemen," Preston's voice boomed through the massive surround sound speakers, washing over the silent crowd. "We are standing on the precipice of a monumental new era for the city of Atlanta. For far too long, we have allowed the historical decay of the Southside District to hold our great city back. We have looked the other way while those dilapidated, crumbling blocks sat like a festering wound on our urban landscape." I watched my father stand right beside him, nodding solemnly in agreement. Harrison, a black man who had grown up running through the very streets Preston was currently calling a festering wound, was proudly endorsing his own erasure. Big Mama had scraped and bled on those streets to give Harrison a future, and now he was standing on a stage eagerly co-signing the destruction of her legacy just to secure a fraction of white validation. It was a masterclass in self-hatred. "But tonight that era of decay officially ends," Preston proclaimed, raising his chin, soaking in the rapt attention of the wealthy elite. Capital Vanguard, in exclusive partnership with Harrison's incredible legacy firm, is stepping in to do what no one else had the vision or the capital to accomplish. "We are taking the South Side back." Jasmine clapped her hands together, a beaming, picture-perfect smile plastered across her face. She looked around at the wives of the city councilmen and the local judges, making sure everyone saw how important she was, how elevated her status had become by marrying this arrogant savior. She was actively celebrating the annihilation of our cultural history, completely consumed by the illusion of her own superiority. Thanks to our upcoming partnership with Governor Sterling and the full backing of the state legislature, we are going to completely erase that outdated, useless neighborhood. Preston declared, his voice rising in a crescendo of absolute hubris. "We are going to wipe the slate clean. We will bring in the heavy machinery, tear down the blight, and build a highly civilized, premium commercial future. We are talking about luxury developments that will finally attract the right kind of citizens to this city. We are washing away the dirt to build a masterpiece." The dog whistles in his speech were not even disguised. He was standing in a room full of powerful investors, promising to aggressively displace an entire community of hardworking black families so he could build luxury playgrounds for the rich. And my family was standing right there, serving as his eager human shields, offering their black faces to validate his racist predatory gentrification. They were selling out their own bloodline to finance a country club membership. Preston reached over to a silver tray resting on the podium and picked up a crystal flute of champagne. He held it high in the air, his chest puffed out with the ultimate thrill of victory. He truly believed he had conquered the world. He believed he had outsmarted the system, bypassed the zoning laws, and secured a billion-dollar empire. To the bright, civilized future of Atlanta, Preston cheered, turning slightly to raise his glass toward the governor, and to the unstoppable visionary power of Capital Vanguard. The crowd erupted into polite, wealthy applause. The sound of clapping hands filled the massive ballroom. Beatrice wiped a fake, highly choreographed tear from her eye, turning to smile at the press cameras. Jasmine blew a dramatic kiss to her husband from the front row. Harrison stepped forward, adjusting his tie, looking eager and ready to take his turn at the microphone to solidify his place in this fraudulent empire. I stood completely still at the very back of the room, my arms crossed over my chest, watching them revel in the absolute peak of their delusion. I let them soak in the applause. I let them taste the victory. I let them climb to the absolute highest point of their imaginary mountain, breathing in the thin, intoxicating air of absolute power. They had no idea the ground beneath their feet had already vanished. They were standing on nothing but dead air and stolen equity, and gravity was about to collect its due. Preston held his crystal flute high in the air, a smug, victorious grin plastered across his pale face as the ballroom erupted in applause. He turned slightly, extending his free hand toward Governor Sterling, fully expecting the most powerful man in the state to step up to the podium, shake his hand, and publicly validate his billion-dollar conquest of the South Side. Jasmine was practically vibrating with pride in the front row, and my father Harrison stood with his chest puffed out, ready to share in the glory of selling out his own community. But Governor Sterling did not smile. He did not raise a glass, and he absolutely did not reach out to shake Preston's extended hand. Instead, the governor stepped up to the crystal podium with a face carved from solid ice. He moved with a stiff, rigid authority that instantly commanded the room. He reached out and wrapped his hand around the microphone, pulling it away from Preston. The sharp screech of audio feedback echoed through the massive ballroom, cutting through the polite applause like a blade. The sudden, harsh noise made the entire crowd flinch. Within seconds, the clapping died away completely. The clinking of glasses ceased. The wealthy elite of Atlanta people who survived on reading the subtle shifts of power in any given room instantly sensed that something was catastrophically wrong. The atmosphere in the grand foyer went from celebratory to suffocatingly tense in the blink of an eye. Preston slowly lowered his hand, his arrogant smile faltering. He let out a nervous, breathy chuckle, leaning in toward the microphone to try and save face. "Governor, please," Preston murmured, trying to project casual familiarity. "The floor is all yours." Governor Sterling ignored him completely. He did not even look at Preston. He stared straight out into the sea of bewildered billionaires and legacy families. "I believe there has been a severe and monumental misunderstanding here tonight." The governor began, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings with cold, absolute authority. A collective gasp rippled through the front rows. I watched my mother Beatrice stiffen. Her hand flew to her diamond necklace, her eyes darting frantically around the room as the social humiliation began to take root. Jasmine dropped her hands to her sides, the picture-perfect smile melting off her face. Governor Sterling turned his head just enough to look at Preston and Harrison standing beside him on the stage. "I listened to your speech just now." "Mr. Preston," the governor continued, his tone dripping with unmistakable disdain. "I listened to you describe the historic Southside District as a blight. I listened to you talk about clearing out decay and bringing civilization to a neighborhood that has been the cultural and economic backbone of the African American community in this city for generations." Harrison swallowed hard, a visible bead of sweat forming on his forehead. He took a hesitant step forward, trying to use his status as a prominent black developer to shield his white son-in-law from the mounting disaster. Governor Harrison interrupted, his voice trembling slightly. "Preston simply meant that our joint venture is aiming to modernize the infrastructure. We are fully committed to the city's progress." "Do not interrupt me," Harrison, the governor snapped, shutting my father down with such force that Harrison physically recoiled. The governor turned back to the microphone, his eyes sweeping the silent, captivated audience. Let me be unequivocally clear to every investor, every politician, and every member of the press in this room, Governor Sterling announced, his voice ringing with absolute finality. The state of Georgia does not have a policy of whitewashing Black history. My administration does not support predatory gentrification disguised as urban renewal. And I am certainly not standing on this stage to endorse the demolition of cultural heritage so a heavily leveraged corporate entity can build luxury boutiques. Preston's face drained of all color. The smug, untouchable titan of real estate vanished, replaced by a terrified, desperate man watching his entire empire disintegrate on live television. The press cameras at the back of the room were flashing rapidly, capturing every single agonizing second of his public execution. But Governor Preston stammered, stepping toward the podium, his voice cracking with panic. "You cannot be serious. We play golf together. Your campaign committee received massive contributions from Capital Vanguard's parent company. The zoning permits are already drafted. We have back-channel agreements. You promised to sign the state endorsement tonight." The crowd erupted into shocked whispers. Preston was panicking so badly he was openly admitting to backroom political deals into a live microphone. He was drowning, pulling everyone down with him. Governor Sterling turned to fully face Preston, his expression shifting from cold to openly furious. "We are not friends," Mr. Preston, the governor stated, delivering the words like a physical blow. "And if you think a campaign contribution buys you the right to bulldoze a historic district using fraudulent paperwork, you are far more foolish than your reputation suggests. I came here tonight specifically to distance my administration from you and your criminal enterprise. I will absolutely not be signing any contracts with Capital Vanguard or Harrison's legacy firm. Your proposed partnership is dead." Harrison let out a strangled, breathless sound. He grabbed the edge of the stage backdrop to keep his knees from buckling. The great Harrison, the man who had slapped me and thrown me out of his party just an hour ago to protect his pristine image, was currently imploding in front of the most powerful people in Atlanta. His entire legacy was burning to the ground, and he was powerless to stop the flames. Preston lost all remaining composure. His white privilege flared up, completely blinding him to the reality of the situation. He aggressively stepped forward, pointing a shaking finger at the governor of Georgia. "You cannot back out now," Preston demanded, his voice rising into a desperate shout. "You do not have the legal authority to stop this project. I have the deeds. I hold the master title to the South Side. Harrison transferred the commercial rights to Capital Vanguard this morning. The land belongs to me, and you are going to sign those permits, or I will bury your administration in litigation for the next decade." Governor Sterling did not flinch. He looked at Preston with a mixture of pity and profound disgust. "You do not hold the title to anything," Preston, the governor, replied smoothly. "My office was contacted earlier this evening by the state attorney general. We were presented with irrefutable certified documentation proving that the deeds Harrison sold to you were entirely fraudulent. Harrison used heavily mortgaged, defaulted properties to secure your investment capital. He did not own the Southside District when he signed those papers, and you failed to perform even the most basic legal due diligence before leveraging your entire company on stolen equity." Jasmine let out a piercing, horrified scream from the front row. She grabbed the edge of the stage, looking up at her husband and her father with wide, terrified eyes. "Dad, tell him that is a lie," Jasmine cried out, her voice shrill and desperate. "Tell him you own the land. Tell them we are not ruined." Harrison could not speak. He just stood there, hyperventilating, his expensive tuxedo suddenly looking like a prison uniform. He looked at Beatrice, who was currently clutching her chest, sobbing uncontrollably as her wealthy friends literally took steps away from her, treating her like a highly contagious disease. Their social standing was evaporating into thin air. "Permits based on federal bank fraud are null and void." Governor Sterling continued, turning back to the microphone to deliver the final crushing blow. "The state attorney general is currently launching a full investigation into Capital Vanguard and Harrison's holding company for predatory lending forgery and financial exploitation of a vulnerable estate. I did not come here to cut a ribbon, gentlemen. I came here to ensure the public knows that the state of Georgia protects its citizens from corporate predators like you. Preston stumbled backward, bumping into the floral arrangement behind him. A massive vase crashed to the floor, shattering into thousands of pieces. It sounded exactly like the violent destruction of his own ego. He looked wildly out at the audience, searching for an ally, searching for anyone who would validate his supremacy. But the elite crowd was staring at him with undisguised contempt. He was a liability. He was toxic debt. He was a man who had tried to play a billionaire's game and ended up exposing himself as a broke, desperate fraud. "But if you do not own the land," Preston whispered hoarsely, turning his terrified, bloodshot eyes toward Harrison. "If the deeds are fake, then who holds the master title? Who actually owns the South Side?" The entire grand ballroom fell dead silent. Hundreds of powerful investors, politicians, and media members held their breath, waiting for the answer that would dictate the future of the city's most valuable real estate. Governor Sterling adjusted his suit jacket. He looked out over the sea of faces, his gaze scanning the crowd until his eyes locked directly onto mine at the very back of the room. He gave me a slow, deeply respectful nod. I stood there in the shadows, my arms crossed, watching my family suffocate on the very lies they had used to destroy me. I watched my mother weeping, my sister screaming, my brother-in-law trembling, and my father paralyzed by his own monumental failure. They had tried to lock me in a room to hide me from the world. They had tried to erase my existence so they could steal my grandmother's legacy. But they had forgotten the most important rule of power. You can never trap the person who owns the building. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute, hanging in the heavy perfumed air like a guillotine waiting to drop. Governor Sterling did not hesitate. He raised his right hand and pointed directly through the center of the massive crowded room, his finger aimed squarely at the shadows near the heavy mahogany doors where my father had tried to banish me. The sea of billionaires, legacy developers, and state politicians turned as one collective entity, following the trajectory of the governor's hand. As they shifted, a clear, wide path opened up down the center of the room, parting the wealthy elite like the Red Sea. I stepped out of the shadows. The brilliant light from the crystal chandeliers caught the rich, vibrant fabric of my emerald silk dress, making it shimmer like polished armor. I did not rush. I took slow, measured steps, the sharp, rhythmic click of my heels echoing off the marble floor, cutting through the dead silence of the ballroom. Every single eye in the room was locked onto me. I kept my head high, my spine perfectly straight, projecting the absolute, unshakable authority that my parents had spent 32 years trying to beat out of me. "Do any of you actually know who this woman is?" Governor Sterling's voice boomed across the silent room, demanding the attention of every elite guest present. "Because you should. You all absolutely should." I reached the front of the room, stopping just below the elevated stage, where my father and my brother-in-law were currently suffocating on their own monumental failures. Jasmine was trembling so violently in the front row that the heavy diamonds at her throat were visibly shaking. Beatrice looked as though she was about to faint, her manicured hands gripping the edge of a cocktail table with white-knuckled desperation just to keep herself upright. "Allow me to introduce you to the true power in this room," the governor proclaimed, looking down at Preston with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. "This is Zuri. She is the brilliant mind and the sole managing partner behind Obsidian Holdings. And more importantly, to everyone in this city, she is the sole legal and uncontested owner of the entire Southside District Trust." A massive, unified gasp ripped through the crowd. The press cameras stationed at the back of the room exploded into a frenzy of blinding white flashes, capturing the exact moment my family's fraudulent empire was publicly incinerated. The elite society of Atlanta people, who survived entirely on reading the subtle shifts of power, instantly recognized that the tectonic plates of the city's real estate market had just violently realigned. Harrison let out a pathetic, strangled wheeze. He staggered backward, his expensive custom tuxedo looking suddenly far too large for his shrinking, defeated frame. He stared down at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying, agonizing realization. The daughter he had hidden away, the scapegoat he had sacrificed to protect a lie, was currently standing in front of him as a billionaire titan. But that is not all. Governor Sterling continued refusing to give Preston or Harrison a single second to recover. The governor turned his attention to the press pool, making sure his next words were recorded permanently for the evening news broadcasts. Effective as of 8 o'clock this morning, the state of Georgia has officially appointed Zuri as the chief advisor for the newly established Economic Heritage Preservation Project. She has been granted full state backing and sweeping federal grants to restore the Southside District. She will be maintaining its rich, vibrant history while building generational wealth for the Black-owned businesses already operating there. She is protecting our state's legacy from predatory developers. I looked directly into Preston's pale, bloodshot eyes. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving under his tailored suit. He had just threatened to use the government to seize my land through eminent domain, and now that very same government had just handed me the keys to the entire city. His white privilege, the arrogant shield he had used his entire life to bully, exploit, and manipulate his way to the top, had just shattered completely against a wall of undeniable Black excellence. As for you, Mr. Preston, the governor's voice dropped into a dark, unforgiving register that signaled absolute corporate doom. I suggest you call your legal counsel immediately. 10 minutes ago, the Securities and Exchange Commission officially suspended all trading and operations for Capital Vanguard. Your corporate bank accounts are completely frozen. You are currently under active federal investigation for leveraging fraudulent assets, wire fraud, and falsifying collateral across state lines. Federal agents are executing a search warrant at your corporate headquarters as we speak. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. Preston's knees literally buckled beneath him. He grabbed the crystal podium to stop himself from collapsing onto the stage, but his hands were shaking so severely that he knocked the microphone to the floor. The sharp, piercing feedback caused several guests in the front row to cover their ears, but the noise was barely heard over the sudden roar of the crowd. Investors, who had been chatting amicably with my father just 20 minutes ago, were now frantically pulling out their cell phones, shouting orders at their brokers to pull their funds from anything remotely connected to Capital Vanguard or the Harrison legacy firm. Preston looked like a cornered, terrified animal. His arrogant facade was completely stripped away, leaving behind an incompetent man facing decades in a federal penitentiary. His empire was built on toxic debt and stolen equity, and the absolute reality of federal prison was staring him right in the face. Jasmine let out a wailing, hysterical sob. She lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the stage, her perfect silk-pressed hair falling wildly around her face. She was not crying for her husband. She was crying for her credit cards, for her luxury cars, and for the lavish social status she had bought using my blood and my freedom. The high society wives she had spent the entire evening impressing were currently taking physical steps away from her. They were whispering behind their hands, actively treating her like a toxic contagion. Her social currency had flatlined in less than 60 seconds, and the sheer terror of losing her elite status was breaking her mind in real time. Beatrice could not take it anymore. The matriarch who had ruled our family with an iron fist, who had dictated my worth based entirely on my proximity to wealth, completely broke down. She sank into a nearby chair, burying her face in her hands, weeping loudly as the illusion of her perfect, untouchable legacy was broadcasted as a massive, humiliating criminal fraud. She had spent her entire life trying to scrub away the struggles of her past, treating Big Mama's legacy as a dirty secret, only to have her own corruption exposed under the brightest lights in the city. Harrison just stared at me. His eyes were hollow, empty, and completely devoid of the dominating patriarch he had pretended to be just an hour ago. He had spent his entire life running away from where he came from, desperately trying to erase his own mother's struggle so he could rub elbows with people who would never truly respect him. He had sold his soul to a corrupt, arrogant son-in-law, and now he had to watch his discarded daughter save the very legacy he had tried to destroy. The investors he had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to impress were literally turning their backs on him, walking away from the stage in absolute disgust. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I did not need to raise my voice or throw a tantrum. I simply stood there in the blinding light of the press cameras, radiating the calm, absolute power that comes from building an empire on a foundation of truth. I watched the security guards, the very men my mother had tried to use to throw me out, stepping forward to form a protective barrier between the press and the stage, answering exclusively to my company's payroll. They had tried to bury me in the dark. They had forced me to take a felony charge, locked me out of their pristine world, and expected me to wither away into nothing so they could continue living their beautiful, fraudulent lie. They forgot that when you bury a seed in the dirt, you are only giving it the exact environment it needs to grow roots that will eventually crack your entire concrete foundation in half. The South Side was safe. Big Mama's legacy was secure. And the people who had tried to sell our history to the highest bidder were about to lose absolutely everything. The sharp, piercing trill of a cell phone ringtone shattered whatever lingering silence remained in the grand ballroom. It was not just one ring. Within seconds, a cacophony of digital chimes, aggressive vibrations, and urgent notification alerts began erupting in a chaotic chorus directly from Preston's tailored tuxedo jacket. The federal hammer the governor had just described was not a future threat. It was executing in real time. Preston frantically shoved his hand into his inner pocket, his pale fingers trembling so violently he nearly dropped the device on the marble floor. He stared at the glowing screen, his mouth dropping open as a horrific guttural sound clawed its way out of his throat. He was reading the automated alerts from his banking institutions. Massive red banners were likely flashing across his screen, notifying him of zero balances, locked portfolios, and absolute corporate seizure. The Securities and Exchange Commission had moved with ruthless efficiency. His offshore accounts, his corporate credit lines, his personal wealth, everything was instantly vaporized. The polished, untouchable titan of Atlanta real estate snapped. The sophisticated facade of the wealthy, cultured white savior completely melted away, revealing the raw, vicious, and deeply racist monster that had always been lurking just beneath the surface. Preston whipped his head around, his eyes wild and bloodshot, zeroing in on my father. He lunged toward Harrison like a rabid dog cornered in an alleyway. "My accounts are frozen!" Preston roared, his voice cracking with a terrifying, unhinged hysteria. Saliva flew from his lips as he aggressively backed Harrison against the edge of the stage. "Every single dollar I have is locked. My board is frantically messaging me. The feds are raiding my lobby right now. You set me up. You sold me a completely worthless, fraudulent deed." Harrison held his hands up in a desperate, pathetic gesture of surrender. The great patriarch of our family was cowering, physically shrinking away from the white son-in-law he had practically worshipped for the last 5 years. "Preston, please." Harrison stammered, his voice weak and trembling. "I did not know she had the real documents. We can hire lawyers. We can fight this injunction. We have political connections." "Lawyers." Preston shrieked, his face turning a dangerous, blotchy shade of purple. "I do not have a company anymore. I am facing 20 years in federal prison because I trusted a pathetic, lying fraud." Preston turned his manic, furious gaze away from Harrison and swept it over Beatrice and Jasmine. The absolute disgust radiating from him was palpable. The carefully maintained illusion of their perfect blended high society family was entirely obliterated. Preston was no longer looking at his sophisticated elite in-laws. He was looking at people he fundamentally believed were beneath him, people he had only tolerated because they offered him access to lucrative black-owned real estate. Now that the money was gone, his white privilege flared into a toxic, violent inferno. "I should have known better." Preston sneered, his upper lip curling into a snarl of pure hatred. "I should have known better than to do business with you people. You are nothing but a bunch of ghetto-lying frauds playing dress-up in expensive clothes. You drag your trashy, dysfunctional family drama into my boardroom and completely destroy my life. You are a disease, all of you. All of." A loud collective gasp rippled through the remaining crowd. The wealthy black investors and politicians who were still standing in the ballroom bristled at the blatant, racialized venom dripping from Preston's mouth. My parents had spent their entire lives bending over backward to accommodate this man, abandoning their own culture, turning their backs on their own neighborhood, and sacrificing their own daughter just to make sure Preston felt comfortable in their presence. And the very second his pockets were threatened, he threw their race right back in their faces. He stripped them of their dignity and reminded them exactly how little he actually thought of them. Jasmine could not process the collapse of her reality. She was absolutely terrified. Her entire identity, her self-worth, and her social standing were entirely tied to her marriage to this wealthy, powerful white man. Without Preston's money and status, she was nothing. She was just a woman who had aided and abetted federal fraud. Jasmine lunged forward, her diamond necklace swinging wildly as she desperately reached out for her husband. She threw her arms around Preston's bicep, digging her manicured nails into his tuxedo jacket. She was weeping hysterically, her perfect makeup ruined by streaks of thick black mascara running down her cheeks. "Preston, please stop." Jasmine sobbed, her voice, a shrill, begging whine that echoed pathetically across the ballroom. "Do not say these things. We are going to fix this. My dad will fix this. We can call our private wealth managers. We can liquidate the house. I will sell everything I have to help you. Please do not leave me like this. You are my husband. We are a team." Preston looked down at the woman he had vowed to love and protect. There was no affection in his eyes. There was no partnership. There was only the cold, brutal calculation of a man who realized his most prized accessory had just become a massive liability. Jasmine was no longer a beautiful trophy wife to parade around at charity galas. She was an anchor tied to a sinking ship, and Preston was desperate to cut the rope. "Get your hands off me," Preston growled. He did not just pull away. He did not gently detach himself from his panicked wife. Preston ripped his arm back with such violent, aggressive force that it threw Jasmine completely off balance. He planted his hand squarely against her shoulder and shoved her hard. Jasmine let out a sharp cry as her designer heels slipped on the polished marble floor. She went down hard, tumbling backward in a tangle of expensive ruby-red silk and frantic, flailing limbs. She hit the ground with a heavy, sickening thud. The sheer impact knocked the breath out of her lungs, leaving her sprawled across the floor in front of hundreds of people. The elegant, untouchable golden child of the Harrison family was reduced to a weeping, discarded mess at the feet of the man she had worshipped. Beatrice screamed. It was a raw, visceral sound of pure horror. She rushed forward, dropping to her knees on the hard marble to gather her sobbing daughter into her arms. Beatrice clutched Jasmine tightly, glaring up at Preston with wide, terrified eyes. The matriarch, who had commanded Atlanta high society for decades, was currently sitting on the floor of a ballroom, desperately holding the shattered remains of the perfect family she had sacrificed everything to build. Harrison took a sudden, jerky step forward, his fists clenched at his sides. For a fleeting second, the instinct of a father seemed to kick in. He looked as though he was finally going to defend his daughter, to strike back against the man who had just violently assaulted his child in public. But Harrison stopped. He froze mid-step, his eyes darting from Preston's furious face to the flashing cameras of the press pool at the back of the room. Harrison was paralyzed by his own cowardice. He was too broken, too utterly defeated to fight back. He just stood there watching his favorite daughter weep on the floor, completely incapable of being the protector his family actually needed. Preston did not even look down at his wife. He adjusted the lapels of his ruined tuxedo, his chest heaving as he glared at my father with absolute contempt. "You are going to take the fall for this," Harrison Preston threatened, jabbing his finger through the air. "When the federal prosecutors sit me down in that interrogation room, I am going to give them every single piece of dirty correspondence you ever sent me. I am going to testify that you engineered this entire fraud and manipulated my firm into buying stolen assets. I am going to make sure you die in a federal penitentiary." Preston turned on his heel and stormed toward the exit, pushing aggressively past a group of stunned investors. He was running like a coward, fleeing the ballroom to try and salvage whatever scraps of his shattered life he could before the FBI placed him in handcuffs. He left his weeping wife on the floor. He left his ruined in-laws to face the music. He left the room exactly as he had entered it, an arrogant, entitled parasite who destroyed everything he touched. I stood silently near the stage, watching the absolute destruction unfold. I did not intervene. I did not offer a hand to help Jasmine off the floor. I did not offer a word of comfort to my sobbing mother or my paralyzed father. I just watched them reap the exact harvest they had spent the last 10 years sowing. They had bred a culture of greed, betrayal, and elitism within our family, and now those very same toxic traits were eating them alive. The vicious dogs they had trained to attack me had finally turned around and bitten their masters right to the bone. The heavy mahogany doors slammed shut behind Preston with a violent, echoing thud that rattled the crystal wall sconces. He was gone. The White Knight of the Harrison family had completely abandoned them at the very first sign of financial ruin. The grand ballroom, which had been buzzing with the elite power brokers of Atlanta just moments before, was now wrapped in a suffocating heavy silence. The only sound left in the massive space was the pathetic, gasping sobs of Jasmine as she lay sprawled across the cold marble floor. I watched the realization of total destruction wash over my parents. Their empire was gone. Their untouchable social status was obliterated. The federal government was currently seizing their assets, and the high society friends they had spent decades trying to impress were actively backing away from them, treating them like a highly contagious disease. They were standing on the absolute edge of a bottomless cliff. And then I saw the exact second my mother's survival instinct kicked in. Beatrice stopped looking at the doorway where Preston had just vanished. She stopped looking at the wealthy politicians who were whispering and pointing at her. She slowly turned her head, and her wide, frantic eyes locked directly onto me. I was standing tall in the center of the room, flanked by my own private security, holding the full backing of the state government. I was the billionaire CEO who owned the very building she was standing in. The transition was so sudden, so flawlessly hypocritical, that it was almost breathtaking to witness. The cruel image-obsessed matriarch who had violently slapped my face and ordered me out the back door just an hour ago completely vanished. In her place emerged a desperate, groveling woman willing to say absolutely anything to save her own skin. Beatrice stepped right over her weeping, discarded golden child. She did not even reach down to help Jasmine off the floor. She practically sprinted toward me, her silver designer gown swishing frantically around her ankles. Tears began pouring down her face. Not tears of genuine remorse, but the highly weaponized, manipulative tears of a narcissist who had just realized her discarded scapegoat was her only remaining lifeline. Zuri Beatrice cried out, her voice cracking with a perfectly pitched theatrical sob that carried across the entire ballroom. She threw her arms out wide, rushing into my personal space. Zuri, my beautiful, brilliant girl. Before my security team could step in to block her, Beatrice lunged forward and grabbed my forearms. Her manicured fingers dug into the emerald silk of my dress. Her expensive floral perfume washed over me, the same scent she had worn when she dragged me into that police precinct 10 years ago to take a felony charge for her favorite daughter. I always knew you were talented. Beatrice wept, squeezing my arms, looking up at me with wide, desperate eyes. I always knew you had this incredible fire inside you. You did it. You saved us. Preston manipulated us, Zuri. That horrible racist man tricked your father and tried to steal everything we built. But you saw right through him. You secured the legacy. Please, my sweet girl, you have to save us. You have to save our family. I did not move. I did not flinch. I just looked down at her hands, gripping my arms, marveling at the sheer, limitless audacity of her delusion. She actually believed she could just flip a switch and erase decades of systematic abuse. She believed her fake, desperate tears would instantly melt my resolve and bring me running back into the fold to pay off her debts. Harrison was right behind her. My father, the man who had just told me I was a complete embarrassment to his name, hurried over with a frantic, eager light in his eyes. He hastily adjusted his crooked bow tie, trying to project the image of a proud, commanding patriarch. He completely ignored the fact that he was currently under federal investigation for bank fraud. His massive ego was already trying to find a way to take credit for my empire. "Zuri, my little princess!" Harrison said, his voice trembling with a sickening mixture of panic and greed. He reached out, attempting to place a paternal hand on my shoulder, but my lead security guard took a sharp step forward, forcing Harrison to drop his hand. Harrison swallowed hard but kept that desperate, eager smile plastered on his face. "You have done an extraordinary thing tonight," Harrison continued speaking loudly, so the investors in the room could hear him trying to align himself with my power. You played a brilliant, ruthless game. You outsmarted Preston and secured the Southside deeds. I am so incredibly proud of you. With Obsidian Holdings and my industry connections, we can completely dominate this city. We can run this empire together, father and daughter. We will sort out this little misunderstanding with the federal investigators and we will build a dynasty. He actually thought he was going to get a corner office. He genuinely believed I had spent the last 5 years building a multi-billion-dollar venture capital firm from the absolute bottom, just to hand the keys over to the man who had thrown me to the wolves. I looked at my father sweating and groveling. I looked at my mother weeping and clinging to my dress. I looked at Jasmine still sobbing on the floor, completely broken, because her white knight had turned out to be a broke racist fraud. The entire ballroom was completely silent. The governor, the state politicians, and the elite investors were all watching this pathetic, desperate display. They were waiting to see if the powerful CEO of Obsidian Holdings was going to fold to the emotional manipulation of her toxic parents. I slowly raised my hands. I reached down and firmly detached my mother's trembling fingers from my arms. I did not shove her. I did not yell. I simply removed her hands as if I were peeling off a pair of dirty, contaminated gloves. I took a deliberate step back, severing the physical connection completely. I reached into the small, structured pocket of my silk clutch. I pulled out a heavy, monogrammed linen handkerchief. I unfolded the pristine white square of fabric and slowly, methodically began to wipe the sleeves of my dress exactly where Beatrice had just touched me. Beatrice stopped crying. The fake tears completely dried up. She stared at the white fabric in my hands, a fresh wave of profound humiliation washing over her face. She realized in front of the entire high society of Atlanta that I was actively treating her touch like a toxic disease. When I was finished, I did not put the handkerchief back in my purse. I simply opened my fingers and let the expensive linen drop. It fluttered through the air and landed squarely on the polished marble floor right at my mother's feet. Family, I asked, my voice ringing out with a cold, absolute finality that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. You stand in front of me right now and dare to use that word. Harrison opened his mouth to interject, but I cut him off with a single sharp look that froze the blood in his veins. You do not know the first thing about family, Harrison, I stated, my tone dropping into a deadly razor-sharp register. A family protects its own. A family builds together. But you, both of you stripped away my entire future just to feed a parasite. You happily sacrificed my freedom and my spotless record just to ensure Jasmine could go to college and marry a man who looked at us like we were dirt. You threw me into a holding cell so you could keep up your pristine fake image. I took a step forward, forcing both of my parents to physically shrink back from the overwhelming intensity of my presence. And when that was not enough, you tried to sell out our own ancestors. I continued, my voice steady, rhythmic, and relentless. You took the very house that Big Mama bled for, the very neighborhood that gave you life, and you handed it over to an arrogant racist white man who wanted to bulldoze our history for a profit. You mortgaged our legacy to buy designer dresses and luxury cars. You sold your souls for a seat at a table that was built to exclude you. Beatrice was shaking her head frantically, her face pale and terrified. Zuri, please. Beatrice begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate whisper. You are my daughter. We are your blood. You cannot just leave us like this. We will lose everything. The federal prosecutors will take the house. They will take the accounts. We have absolutely nothing left. I looked down at the woman who had slapped me just an hour ago. I looked at the father who had ordered me to leave through the kitchen. I know you have nothing left, I replied, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy or warmth. That is the exact position you put me in 10 years ago. You told me I was a failure. You told me I was a stain on your perfect legacy. So I took the broken, discarded pieces you left me with, and I forged them into a weapon. I turned my gaze to include Jasmine, who had finally pushed herself up off the floor, her face smeared with mascara and absolute ruin. You are not my family, I declared, ensuring every single powerful person in the grand ballroom heard my final verdict. You are parasites. You attached yourselves to Preston because you thought his whiteness and his old money would elevate you. You let him disrespect you, and you smiled while he did it. And now that the host is dead, you are desperately trying to attach yourselves to me. But I do not feed parasites. I eradicate them. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers. The sharp sound echoed like a gunshot across the silent ballroom. Davis and his entire private security detail instantly stepped forward, moving with coordinated military precision. Please escort these individuals out of the building immediately. I commanded, my voice ringing with absolute icy authority. They are polluting my personal property. Harrison's head snapped back as if he had been physically struck. He puffed out his chest, desperately trying to summon the last pathetic ounce of his patriarch persona in front of his wealthy peers. "You cannot do this to me!" Harrison roared, his voice cracking with humiliation. "I am a Platinum VIP member of the Piedmont Elite Club. I have been paying exorbitant dues here for 15 years. You cannot throw me out of my own birthday gala into the street." I let out a soft, genuine laugh that echoed through the breathless crowd. "Oh, I sincerely apologize. I completely forgot to update you on the recent corporate acquisitions in the area." I took one final step closer, looking him dead in his terrified eyes. "My venture capital fund bought this entire club 2 days ago. We own the building, the staff, and the membership registry. Your VIP status was officially revoked the second you tried to lock me in that private room. Happy 60th birthday, Mr. Harrison." Davis and his security team moved in seamlessly. They formed an impenetrable wall of muscle, physically corralling Beatrice Harrison and a sobbing Jasmine toward the heavy mahogany exit doors. Beatrice wailed loudly, her expensive silver gown dragging across the marble floor as she begged the silent crowd for help. No one moved a muscle. The elite politicians and investors simply watched them fall, actively turning their backs on a family that had just become completely toxic. Jasmine scrambled to her feet, clutching her ruined diamond necklace, weeping hysterically for the wealthy husband who had already abandoned her. Harrison walked out last, his head bowed, utterly broken, stripped of his empire, his pride, and his legacy. I am standing here in my penthouse now. I set my empty bourbon glass down on the mahogany table and slowly rise from my leather sofa. I walk over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, pressing my fingertips lightly against the cool glass. The city of Atlanta stretches out endlessly beneath me, an ocean of glittering golden lights and untamed power. Preston completely abandoned Jasmine the very next morning. He filed for an expedited divorce to protect whatever hidden offshore assets he had left, legally stranding my sister with millions of dollars in highly leveraged, toxic corporate debt. My parents lost their sprawling suburban estate to federal seizure within the month. They had to pack their designer clothes into cardboard boxes and move into a cramped, low-income apartment surviving entirely on government assistance. The high society friends they had sacrificed my freedom to impress never returned a single phone call. They pushed me into the darkest, coldest corner of their lives. They threw me to the wolves, fully expecting me to wither away and rot so they could continue living their beautiful, fraudulent lie. They tried to bury me, but they forgot one fundamental rule of nature. The deeper a seed is buried in the mud, the tighter its roots grip the earth, and when it finally sprouts, it shatters the concrete.